I can't live with you, I'm sorry. My grandmother, who had to give up her house, chose to live with my brother and his wife, who had never involved with her before, not with me, who usually took care of her. Why? I was quite shocked by her unexpected words. The fact that I loved my grandmother so much made the shock even greater. My brother, Richard, was smirking at my reaction. She said she'd hate to even think about living with you, Catherine. She complained that you wouldn't even be by her side when she walks, and your cooking is not tasty. That's why she doesn't want to live with you. Besides, unlike you and your husband who don't have children, my wife is soon due for delivery. Grandma is really looking forward to the birth of her great-grandchild, too. Richard was mocking me while looking at my flat belly. Grandma wanted to live with us. If you get it, then get out of here quickly. I decided to go home, as my brother told me to do so, since it was grandmother's decision. I was concerned about her awkward expression, though. Maybe it was for the best after all. My sweet grandmother, who always pours her love on me, must be looking forward to the birth of her great-grandchild, just like my brother said. She would be happier living with my brother and his wife. I kept telling myself that as I made my way home. But that thought was instantly shattered by an event. One day after my grandmother started living with my brother and his wife, I went shopping at the supermarket. Then, an unbelievable sight unfolded before my eyes. Help! I can't anymore. It was my grandmother, who was so emaciated she looked like she was about to collapse, carrying a large load. My name is Catherine. I live with my husband. Our married life is going well, but we are discussing to enjoy a little more time as a couple, so we don't have any plans for children yet. However, since my grandmother seems to be looking forward to the birth of her great-grandchild, we are thinking it might be soon. When I was still a student, my father and mother passed away suddenly in an accident. My grandfather also passed away a few years ago, and ever since then, my grandmother has been living alone. Thinking that it would be inconvenient for my elderly grandmother to live alone in a house, I suggested living together in an apartment when I got married. However, she declined as she didn't want to leave her home, where she has many memories. We also considered living together at my grandmother's house, but it was too far from our workplaces and commuting was difficult, so we gave up. In the end, my grandmother continued to live alone. Instead of living together, I decided to regularly visit my grandmother's house and help with her daily life and doctor's visits. The neighbors said it must be hard, but I didn't feel it was much of a burden. I've always loved my grandmother since I was a child, and my husband fully supported me. My husband himself doesn't have any siblings. His parents and grandparents have already passed away, leaving him with no immediate family. My husband, who is a family-oriented person by nature, was as concerned about grandmother as I was, or even more so, and took care of her. He was happy that his family had grown thanks to grandmother. My husband volunteered to accompany grandmother on her shopping trips and became a conversation partner for her. He even took the initiative to help her with doctor's visits and preparing meals. Grandmother seemed to love my husband like her real grandson, and they seemed to have a good time together, even when I was not around. My husband was told by grandmother many times, "Catherine has a wonderful husband. Please take good care of Catherine." I have one brother, but I feel like grandmother adores my husband more than she adores my real grandson, my brother. One day, after spending such days, there was a road expansion construction, and grandmother's house was forced to be vacated. We can't help it. Although she was shocked and depressed, she decided to vacate. After the eviction, It became a topic of discussion as to whether grandmother would live with my brother and his wife, or with me and my husband. Grandmother is still energetic, but I was worried about her living alone due to her old age. The sudden eviction news was unfortunate for grandmother, but I thought it was just right. We, who had been visiting her every week and spending a good time, and my brother and his wife, who hardly ever came to grandmother's place, I thought for sure that grandmother would say she wanted to live with us, and it was certain that my brother and his wife would say they didn't want to live with grandmother. However, grandmother apparently said, "I will live with Ritter and his wife." The reason I say apparently is because my brother suddenly called and said that's what it is. "We will take care of Granny here. She said she wants to live with us. We'll take care of all the bothersome things like moving. Bye." Before I could ask about the situation, my brother said so quickly and hung up the phone. Before we could digest the sudden news, the move was over without us having a chance to know the circumstances. And before we knew it, grandmother had started living with my brother and his wife, despite the fact that grandmother's relationship with me and my husband was supposed to be very good. I couldn't accept the fact that she had decided to live with my brother and his wife without having a direct conversation with her. And so we visited my brother's house on a holiday to ask grandmother why she suddenly decided to live with the estranged brother and his wife. However, since grandmother was out and not at home, we had to ask my brother for the reason. "Sorry for the sudden visit. There is something I really need to ask you." "You're really sudden. I have plans too, you know." Once we were done talking, get out quickly. Actually, it's about Grandma. Why did she suddenly say she wanted to live with you?" "Why? It's because you weren't properly taking care of Grandma, isn't it?" Suddenly, my brother raised his voice in anger. We didn't expect to hear such a thing from my brother, so we were taken aback and couldn't say anything. "How could I leave it to someone who says they'll take care of it? It ends up doing nothing at all." "What? Why? Wait a minute." I came to my senses after hearing those words and hastily interrupted my brother. "Why? Who on earth said that?" "Just thinking about living with you makes her sick. You don't stay by her side when she walks, and your cooking is terrible and not delicious. That's why she says she doesn't want to live with you." At my brother's words, I felt as if my vision was suddenly enveloped in darkness. I thought I had done my best to help my beloved grandmother with everything I could, because I wanted her to live a long and happy life. Of course, grandmother did show some restraint, but it didn't seem like she really hated it. Sometimes we had fights, but fundamentally, I completely believed we had a good relationship. And yet, to say that she hates living with me. I was hit by a feeling as if all the strength had left my body, but thanks to my husband supporting me, I managed to keep my balance. My husband's expression also seemed stunned by the unexpected content of the conversation, as if he was shocked. And then, my wife, who's actually pregnant. "Huh? She's pregnant?" "Yes, she's nearing her due date." I've never knew about it." "Well, I'm telling you for the first time. You can't tell someone that you were pregnant. It's too embarrassing, right?" My brother says I'm sorry with his mouth, but he looks at my flat stomach and smiles thinly. Then he strokes the nearly due belly of his wife, who was sitting next to him, and looks at my husband with a triumphant expression. Sure enough, sister-in-law's belly does seem to have grown larger than before upon closer inspection. When I told his grandmother that I was nearing my due date, she said she was looking forward to her great-grandchild and wanted to live with us. So that's why living with us is something Grandma herself wanted. As if he had talked enough about living together, my brother shifted his gaze to the TV. I felt a great shock. As I sat there unable to find a reply, my husband slowly rose from his seat, taking out his smartphone. "I'm sorry, brother-in-law. I got a sudden call." "On." "Feel free to do as you please." Accepting those words, my husband left the room while handling the call on his smartphone. After a while, my husband, who had returned to the room while still on the call, gestured for me to come. "I'm sorry, I can't understand what the vendor is saying. Can Catherine take over for me?" Yeah, go ahead." Without even looking at us, my brother answered, his gaze fixed on the TV. "Catherine, I'm sorry to interrupt such an important conversation." I felt disgust at my brother's attitude, but I restrained myself and left the room with my husband. Once my husband reached the hallway, she showed me his phone screen with a mischievous expression. The screen of the smartphone was oddly dark. "What? Why?" "I'm sorry, the code was a lie. See, I had some concerns about your brother-in-law and his wife." "Concerns? Like what?" "Don't you feel something off about his wife's belly, considering she's nearly due? The shape seems odd, doesn't it?" "Really? I didn't think it was particularly strange." "Well, I did think her belly wasn't protruding as much as I'd expect for someone who says they're in the final month. I have a junior colleague at my company who's about to take maternity leave. Her belly is more bloated, if you will. I can't put it into words, but it doesn't feel the same as being in the final month. Take a closer look next time." Being told that, I carefully peeked into the living room from the glass part of the door so as not to be noticed. Looking closely at sister-in-law's large belly, I felt, as my husband had said, that the shape seemed slightly distorted in some way. "Well, if you say so, I can kind of see it that way. But I can't be sure unless I look a little more." "If you get a chance to take a closer look at his wife, could you stealthily check for me? If I do it, she might become suspicious and wary." "Understood. I give it a try." I nodded at my husband's words and returned to the room where my siblings were, pretending to have a casual conversation. Then, casually and naturally, I turned my gaze to sister-in-law's belly. Sister-in-law, it seemed, noticed my gaze and smiled as she stroked her belly. "Oh, I can't believe I didn't even serve tea when you both were kind enough to visit. I'm sorry, Richard. I'm going to make some tea now. Please wait." Richard responded indifferently to sister-in-law, who was pregnant and heading towards the kitchen. After hearing my husband's suspicion, Richard's response and the attitude also felt odd. Sister-in-law was due any day now. Did my brother have any interest or concern? Wouldn't he normally be more concerned about his pregnant wife? Seeing his reaction, my husband subtly signaled me with his gaze. "Catherine, shouldn't you help his wife with the tea?" "That's a good point. We shouldn't let a pregnant woman do all the work herself." Saying that, I stood up naturally. My brother, as usual, was focused on the TV and seemed completely oblivious to our actions. I followed my sister-in-law into the kitchen to help her. As I reached for the kitchen door, I saw my sister-in-law rummaging around her belly area and sticking her hand inside her clothes. I quickly moved into her blind spot and quietly observed her. My husband's intuition might be correct. I decided to secretly start recording a video with my smartphone. To my surprise, while saying, "Actually it's uncomfortable like this," my sister-in-law pulled a large cushion from under her clothes. Her stomach was flat. Moreover, after she laid the cushion she had removed from her stomach on the floor, she immediately sat down and started using her smartphone. However, it's really ridiculous that the old woman is so dedicated to believing in pregnancy due to such a silly trick. Well, it's natural for the sake of her eagerly anticipated great-grandchild. Taken aback by the unexpected scene, I lost my voice in shock. My husband's intuition was sharp. Our grandmother was genuinely looking forward to the birth of her great-grandchild. If she learned this truth, she would be shocked and saddened. Why would she tell such a ridiculous lie just because she wants to live with our grandmother? I couldn't understand my siblings' intentions, and the shocking scene in front of me was making me dizzy. After a little while, my sister-in-law put the cushion back under her clothes and began to prepare the tea. I hurriedly stopped the recording and entered the kitchen as if I had just arrived. I returned to the living room with my sister-in-law carrying the tea, but I was eager to tell my husband about the shocking scene I had witnessed in the kitchen, and I exchanged a few words with my brother and then started preparing to leave. No matter how I looked at it, my brother's reaction was still strange, despite the fact that our grandmother cherished both me and my husband. It's hard to believe she would say she dislikes me. Moreover, to pretend to be pregnant to deceive us, there must be something more. While contemplating these thoughts, I left my brother's apartment. As I got into the elevator, I showed the video I had taken earlier to my husband. Upon seeing the video, my husband expressed his shock. I can't believe she was actually pretending to be pregnant to deceive us. As we were discussing how to break this news to our grandmother, we reached the entrance of the apartment building and spotted a familiar figure. This person quickly approached us with a joyful smile and called out to us, "Oh my, it's been a while. Did you come to visit Richard?" It was our grandmother, but I was surprised at the sight of her, which I hadn't seen in a while. There was no mistake that it was our grandmother, but she seemed to have shrunk significantly in size since I last saw her. Her once neatly arranged white hair was now unkempt, and her clothes were wrinkled. It was a sight I couldn't believe was coming from our grandmother, who used to say, "Just seeing a beautiful reflection of yourself in the mirror can make your day sparkle. So Catherine, always take care of your appearance." Seeing our grandmother carrying 2 large shopping bags, we hurriedly took the bags from her. The bags were quite heavy, and it was a strain to hold them. It was more than I could imagine an elderly woman like our grandmother carrying alone. As our grandmother sighed in relief at being free from the heavy load, I couldn't help but ask, "Grandma, why are you carrying such heavy and large luggage alone? Moreover, what happened to your appearance? You've lost a lot of weight since I last saw you." "Oh my, Catherine, you're as energetic as ever. Seeing you like this puts me at ease. These are groceries for Richard's household. I can't go shopping tomorrow because I had to go to the hospital, so I did it all today." Despite her still serene and gentle demeanor, it was clear that our grandmother could not completely hide her fatigue. "Why, is Grandma the only one doing housework? Don't the people living with you, like my brother and sister-in-law, help with chores?" "Well, it seems like your brother Richard has never done housework before. And his wife, well, she's close to her due date. I can't ask her to overexert herself. She must be feeling quite anxious about her first childbirth, so I want to be there for her as much as I can. But because of my age, I can't do things as efficiently. I'm so busy with housework that I've neglected myself, embarrassingly enough." "So the reason you wanted to live with my brother and the others was?" "I wanted to help since a great-grandchild is about to be born. I know you boys have been suggesting we live together for a long time, and I'm sorry." Saying this, our grandmother apologized to us, lowering her head. "Please don't. Lift your head, Grandma. We understand your feelings. Please don't feel like you need to apologize." "That's right, Grandma. You did nothing wrong, so don't apologize." Hearing our words, our grandmother slowly lifted her head. Seeing her gentle face, we felt relieved. "Hey, I want to ask, you didn't refuse to live with us because you dislike us, right?" "What? Who said that? Catherine and her husband, you both are the most precious grandchildren to me. You won't find any grandchildren as kind and good as you two anywhere in the world. I see. I'm glad to hear you feel that way. Who said that? I just like Catherine and the others. They won't get away with it. The anxiety and sadness that we had been harboring had vanished, as we chatted with our grandmother, whom we hadn't seen in a while. My husband probably felt the same. When I glanced at him, he had a very peaceful expression on his face. My brother, Richard's voice, had been nonsense, and the claim that sister-in-law was pregnant was also a lie. All I could feel towards my deceitful brother and his wife was distrust. I wanted to tell my grandmother the truth, but I was hard seeing her looking forward to the birth of a great-grandchild. What should I do? When I looked at my husband in silence, he nodded with a determined gaze. Seeing my husband's resolved expression, I mustered the courage to tell our grandmother. Grandma, there's something I need to tell you. It's really hard to say. You might be shocked, but please listen calmly. Huh? What's the matter? All of a sudden. Actually, sister-in-law wasn't pregnant at all. What? Then what about her big belly? It seems she stuffed cushions to make her stomach look big. No way, even if it's a joke. Don't say such things or I get mad at you, even if you're Catherine. I'm not joking, look at this. I showed my grandmother a video of my sister-in-law's behavior in the kitchen. Initially, my grandmother didn't believe it, but when she watched the video, she was shocked and began to tremble, her lips quivering. Huh? That's impossible, something like this. Yes, it's true. This is the reality, Grandma. So, all the stories about Richard's wife being pregnant were lies. After learning the truth, even our normally restrained grandmother couldn't hide her anger towards my brother, and she explained to us how things had come to the point of living together. She had taken over all the household chores under the pretense of sister-in-law's pregnancy, but was treated like a maid and yelled at when she couldn't do something. They claimed to need money as sister-in-law was preparing for childbirth, so they had taken a significant amount from her savings, including the compensation for the relocation. She used to have clothes and accessories that she had cherished since her youth, but reluctantly gave them up when sister-in-law insisted on having them. From the thoughtfulness of stress is the worst for a pregnant woman, she said she complied with everything they asked, and even if it was in the middle of the night, if sister-in-law craved something, she would tell my grandmother to go buy it at the supermarket that was open late. As my grandmother told us about these many heartless events, we felt our anger bubbling up. Hey, Grandma, let's live together after all. After hearing all these terrible things, I can't stand to let my brother continue to live with you. Yes, I think that's best. I can't be with Richard anymore after he lied about the pregnancy and did such terrible things to me. Catherine, please let me live with you. That same day, my grandmother packed her belongings and decided to live with us in our apartment. She didn't have much of her own, so her belongings were minimal and easy to pack. The reason she had so little was that my brother had sold off anything that looked valuable when she moved. The money they gained from that was seized, supposedly to be used for the unborn great-grandchild. I could no longer bear my brother and his wife, who constantly brought up the topic of their unborn child, to exploit and drain my grandmother of her money and belongings. That night, my brother realized that my grandmother had left the house and kept calling me, but I purposely did not answer. A few days later, my brother and his wife showed up at our apartment. I wanted to ignore them, but they kept bustling the intercom, and it looked like it might become a nuisance to the neighbors, so I reluctantly opened the front door. Standing next to my furious brother was my sister-in-law, looking downcast and sad. As soon as he saw me, my brother started yelling so loudly that spit was flying from his mouth. "You old hag, because of the shock of you leaving, my wife miscarried. How are you going to compensate for this? We're going to demand damages, you know." "My baby." Then, sister-in-law dramatically covered her eyes with her hand while sneakily checking our reactions. Seeing her ridiculous act, I nearly burst out laughing. At the nosy exchange at the front door, my husband and my grandmother came out from the room. As soon as my grandmother saw them, she exploded with anger. "You too! No matter how humble you act, I won't believe your lies anymore. I don't have a single penny left to give to you. So you've been poisoned by Catherine and her hang, haven't you? I didn't know what you were told, but even you were looking forward to the birth of your great-grandchild, right? Despite that, you suddenly left the house. My wife miscarried due to the shock and sadness of you suddenly disappearing, you know." "Ha! I'm not believing such nonsense anymore." "How cruel! It's not a lie at all." To end the fruitless argument between my grandmother and my brother's couple, I pulled out my smartphone from my pocket and said, "So, after seeing this, can you still say it's not a lie?" Intrigued, my brother and sister-in-law peered at the phone, but their complexions changed abruptly as they watched the video playing. The video showed sister-in-law in the kitchen, clearly pulling a cushion from under her clothes. To make matters worse, there was also an audio of her mocking my grandmother. They stood there, speechless, opening and closing their mouths like cop. "I assume you understand now? Now, please leave promptly." My brother and sister-in-law, who had been full of resentment, had no retort against the refutable evidence. They left in haste. "You old hag! Even if we do have a great-grandchild, you are never going to meet them." With that, he left his desperate parting shot. It seemed that my brother and his wife, who relied solely on my grandmother's money for income, were quite destitute after she left. My brother had quit his job, relying on my grandmother's pension and savings, spending his day in leisure. Meanwhile, his wife splurged on brand-name items, which resulted in a significant amount of debt. They are apparently having trouble making ends meet, being chased every month for repayments. Despite numerous refusals, they frequently come to our apartment begging for money, so I finally reported them to the police. Soon after we started living with my grandmother, I found out I was pregnant. There's also a fear that my financially pressured brother and his wife might lash out at some point, so we were considering moving. As for my grandmother, she is eagerly anticipating the birth of her great-grandchild and cherishing me more than ever before, so much so that I want to tell her she's being overprotective. I spend every day imagining a happy life with my husband, my grandmother, and our upcoming child, feeling a swell of joy in my heart.